Let's bring in two people who've been following the chaos in Congress. Tia Mitchell is the Washington bureau chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and Philip Bump is a national columnist for the Washington Post. And thanks to both of you for joining us.
Of course, thank
you.
Philip, beyond the drama and dysfunction, and we've seen a lot of both of those things, why do these failed votes that we've seen throughout the week matter?
I would say there are two reasons. The first is that it suggests that any idea that the Republicans would unite as a caucus and be able to pass legislation with their very narrow majority in the House, that's out the window. It's very clear now that the far-right fringe of the caucus is going to do everything in its power to try and get its way on fights from the very first fight that the House is undertaking. And the second reason I think it's important is because it reflects more broadly on the Republican Party. And it suggests that for all of the discussion about Donald Trump's role in the party and about how he's been sidelined and how the party is looking for new leaders, it shows that there is still this fringe that still carries a lot of weight and still is responsive to both the base and conservative media in a way that allows them to gain value from being obstructionist in this way. And I think that, too, is important.
And Tia, I feel like you won't take issue with either of those points, but let me ask the same question to you. For someone who's watching, particularly in Canada, and saying, okay, like I get it, interesting for the political reporters, but why does this matter, Tia?
Right, and I really want to key in on the first point Philip made. You know, it's not just that this is dysfunction and, you know, kind of entertaining to watch. This is going to reflect on the next 2 years of how the federal government in America runs. So with those far-right House members showing that they can be obstructionists, you know, it's been said that this speaker vote is supposed to be the easiest vote they take for this 2-year congressional session. So if they're already having these breakdowns and this inability to govern from a majority, it reflects very poorly on the ability of this new Republican majority to get things done for 2 years.
So, Philip, let's give the sort of the overview again, particularly for Canadians who may not have been watching this, you know, for every minute of every day throughout the week, as you probably have. Kevin McCarthy, the guy who's been trying so hard to get elected to the speaker's job, is fairly right of center. You know, has clearly been a supporter of Trump. So, why wasn't he able for so many of these votes to win?
Yeah, it's interesting because you said that he clearly was a supporter of Trump. And I think a lot of Trump supporters would disagree with that. And part of the challenge that Kevin McCarthy has had is that he is definitionally part of the establishment Republican Party. He's been in Washington for a long time. He made his way up through the ranks. He served alongside a number of other prominent Republicans who are loathed by Donald Trump supporters, like Paul Ryan, like Eric Cantor, who lost his primary in 2014 very famously. That's who Kevin McCarthy arrived with. And so Kevin McCarthy has been very deliberate about trying to appeal to Donald Trump's base. He hit some road bumps, 2 years ago, basically tonight, when he was excoriating Donald Trump, at least behind the scenes, because of the riot at the Capitol. But Kevin McCarthy has always been a latecomer to the Trump movement. And that is exactly what provides the space, provides the window for people like Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz, these folks who you've heard of, who are these far-right agitators. They can point at him and say, he's not one of us. He is part of the establishment. He is exactly who we're talking about when we talk about Drain the Swamp. And that gets them all the play and the attention and the fundraising that they're looking for. And that's why he's had such a difficult time.
Okay, so it's a much different political system in the United States than what we have in Canada. But we, Canadians know the president is a Democrat. The Senate is controlled by the slimmest of margins, but still controlled by Democrats. Sure, the Republicans control the House, but we see this chaos. Tia, and you touched on it in your first answer, but I want to ask you to look at it in a bit more detail. What do you think all of this means for the governing of America over the next 2 years?
It means that we can expect very little of substance to get done. And we can also, the worry is, here's what has to be done no matter what. They got to fund the government or the government shuts down. So how do we get that done when in the House there are, far right members who have made it clear that they will go as far as making a motion to remove the speaker if he doesn't do what they want to do when it comes to funding the government. So he's got to appease them to get something passed in the House, but we know that can't pass in the Senate, where not only are Democrats in the majority, but there are a lot of senators who are not far right and won't go with some of the things the House Freedom Caucus wants to do. there's no consensus there. We're looking at government shutdowns. We're looking at a possible, if Republicans refuse to raise the debt ceiling, for example, the America could default on its debt, and that could lead to global financial crisis. And that sounds very alarmist, but that is something that is on the table under this new Republican majority that is being kind of jerked around by a handful of far right members. We're talking
Phil-
about military spending and just a lot of things that are now not certain that the American government can get done with the reality of politics today.
Philip, we have about a minute for this, but I think about how the United States often described, and over the years accurately described as, the cradle of democracy, the promoter of democracy. There's so much about, you go into Washington, D.C., and it's awe-inspiring sometimes to even just see the buildings. How does it feel now to be, covering politics in the United States?
I mean, I think in the abstract, having a series of votes on something isn't necessarily detrimental to democracy. That's not the problem. The problem is that the Republican Party is unable to function. Exactly as Tia just articulated. It's not just that the hard things are going to be hard, the easy things are going to be hard when you have this very small faction of people who are fighting everything that's happening. And so, yeah, I mean, look, democracy has been shaky in the United States for the past several years. It's January 6th, right? We know what happened 2 years ago tonight. So this itself is not, I think, problematic. It is, however, the fact that nothing has changed substantially within the GOP and that this far-right faction that is not interested in governing necessarily, that they still have this amount of power, I think that's the problem. And I think, as Tia said, it bodes poorly for the next 2 years.
Yeah, it's a small group, but it sure does seem to have a lot of power in a very powerful country. Thanks to both of you for your analysis.
Certainly, thank you.